sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
Sinners and saints, bitches and taints, whores, sluts, skanks, bastards, etc. Welcome to Alan After Dark. Sounded a little different this week, didn't it? You know, I've been debating on what to talk about this week, and you all might have thought that I would be bringing up some of the horrifying events that happened last week with the U.S. election, but I'm not really ready to talk about that. I'll just say that I'll document right now that I'll be saying a lot of I told you so's in the future. The warnings were not believed, and we're going to pay a heavy price for the choice that was made. One of the things that come back to mind this week as I was trying to absorb the shock was remembering how it was before the gay community achieved a semblance of equality. So we're going to take a trip back in time to when things were very different for gay people, in particular here in the South. One of the first episodes of Alan After Dark, I had recalled the first time I ever went to a gay bar. And if you remember, that night I find the location of the first gay bar I ever went to. I drove around the block 7 or 8 times just trying to work up the nerve to go inside. And when I went inside, I was one of the first ones there, and I just assumed that there would be 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 10 people. And to my surprise, there were hundreds that night. The place became a home away from home. It was such a special place that you felt free and you could be yourself and you could find sex or possibly even love and friends, and you were protected. So it actually took on a sense of magic for me at the beginning. It was a couple of years before reality tried to invade those walls. When I became relatively well known at the club, I become very comfortable with going there and being more myself. And you get perhaps it's a false sense of security, especially when you think that normal, rational people with basic common sense will understand what being gay is. I have to admit that it came as a bit of a surprise when I realized that people didn't understand, didn't want to understand, and could flat out hate you for what they believed a gay person is. The club that I went to, they had this parking lot beside their building, and it was like a little bit lower than the building, so you would go down almost like a ramp to park, and you had to walk up that ramp and go down the street to get to the front doors. I never would have realized how blatant homophobia would be until I had my own experiences just walking from that entrance of the parking area down the street to get to the entrance of the club. Fortunately, there were cars parked along the street, so you had the car between you and the actual street while you were walking along the sidewalk. It was a warm summer night, and I was walking the same path that I'd always walked many, many times before at that point, and I heard the car coming along the street. At first, it was normal because cars traveled that street a lot, but for some reason, I just had this strange feeling as I heard the engine rev, and I could tell that the car was speeding up. As I was approaching the front entrance to the club, a guy with the window down just started yelling, "Cocksucking faggot! I hope you die of AIDS! You're going to hell, you fucking freak!" It traumatized me at first. I was startled. I just couldn't believe that someone would say things like that. I thought we were actually progressing at that point, but we weren't. And when I got inside and friends started showing up, I told them what happened, and they all had their own stories. One of my friends says, "Well, you're lucky. I had a brick thrown at me." I was like, horrified. I'm like, "A brick?" And another one said, "I got eggs thrown at me one night." And another guy said, well, I've had half-empty beer bottles thrown at me from windows. So you kind of lucked out. Your first time was just somebody yelling nasty things. It could have been a whole lot worse. And so I finally had that first taste of reality interfering with the magic of this place that I had grown to love and depend on to help me feel more like part of the gay community. Then one night, it was a terrible night there. I had kind of had a crush on this guy, and he kind of shot me down. I was just really kind of, I guess you could say, licking my wounds. And I was leaving the club. It was about 1:30, I guess. And as I stepped out to get to the street, a pickup truck comes by with 6 or 7 guys in the back of it. And they all started hurling obscenities at me and everything. And I was ready to fight at that point. Same shit, the same fucking words that they all shout. They have no creativity. It just really made my night even worse. I mean, they kept on going. They don't dare stop. But you know what? It's never going to be a fair fight either. 1 against 5 or 6 is not fair. And that's how they do that. They roam in packs usually. But they're racing by most of the time if it's just one. But we started thinking, someone could actually have a gun and could shoot you as you were leaving or going to the club. It wasn't unthinkable. There have been incidences there where someone did flash a gun, and one time a guy flashed a knife, but it never came of anything. But still, that thought ran through my mind always. Fortunately, they opened up the fencing on one side of the parking lot that gave you straight access to the front of the club. Made it a lot easier, and it kept you from being on the street. This is a smart way to protect the people that came to the club. And I was very relieved when they did that. It was just an absolute relief to have that there. Now, it wasn't always scary there, even with the haters that would come by. One night, I think I told you before, in the summertime, the club would be packed on a Friday night in particular, and it would get really, really hot in the club. Outside the front entrance of this club, there were these stair steps that led to the second floor to the club's office, and people would go out just to cool off. You would sit out there on the steps, and you would flirt and talk and things and just cool off and chill in the summer night. And a lot of the queens would be out there, in between performances upstairs, with your makeup and your clothes. They would be very hot. It would be very uncomfortable under those layers of makeup and the wigs and everything. And so a lot of times the queens would be out there too, and we would all be just chatting it up. And these 2 guys one time, little punks, probably like just 16 or 17, roaming around. And they were walking down the street. They weren't in a vehicle. They were walking down the street. And they decided they were going to talk shit. And they were yelling out this stuff right there in front of the club. Well, imagine the scene when they start screaming for help with about 6 drag queens in high heels chasing them down the street, going to whoop their ass. I tell you, I was on the ground laughing my ass off, hearing them scream for help as these queens were running down the street after them. We never saw them again. At least I never did. I don't want it to come off that everybody was like that. They weren't. There were a lot of progressive people who understood sexuality and didn't go crazy at the notion of gay couples and gay sex. And you could be, in some places, openly gay and it not be a big deal. But even if there's one violent homophobe, that could be a risk to everyone that's gay. And that's why we were always so cautious about who knew. And you kept your secret closely guarded in most cases. Now, the job that I worked at the time that I was going to this club, I wasn't out, but I did not know that people knew that I was gay. That my boss actually figured it out at the interview and told the powers that be in that company, hey, I really like this guy. He's what we need. But he's gay. Do you all have a problem with me hiring him? And they were like, no, that's fine. So I did have people around me at work that I could be myself, even though I'm just me. There was no front I was putting on. I was just me. And I'm no different than anybody else. It's just that I like guys instead of girls. But when the company was expanding and they opened an office in Atlanta, I was put in charge of the financial aspects of that division. I was going down to Atlanta a few times a year. At first, people were nice, but some of the people left for other jobs, and they hired this new woman. I could tell right off the bat that she and I weren't going to be friendly with each other, just the way that she seemed to be not wanting to be around me, I guess is the way to put it. She acted like she was, I don't know, I can't really put my finger on it exactly, other than she just didn't like me. Of course, the reason I'm telling you this story is because I did find out the reason why she didn't like me. She came up to our office in Tennessee for extra training. And I think I told you that the boss was a pilot and he had his own private plane and he would fly people back and forth sometimes. Well, the boss's executive assistant was driving him and this woman back to the airport. And when she got back, she said, Alan, I am so sorry. That bitch is a total homophobe. She was calling you fag, queer, and everything right in front of the boss. And she said the boss was not happy with her conversation either. And I'm like, really? She goes, yeah, she despises you because you're gay. I'm like, well, that's good to know. And a couple of days later, the boss was back in our office and he called me in there and he said, I know that you were told what she had said. And I, yeah. And he said, well, I'm like, well, what? You want me to fire her? And I was like, no. You fire her if she's not doing a good job. You don't fire her for that. Maybe if she's around me enough, she'll learn a lesson about what gay people are like. And he was like, fair enough. But I never forgot that. And she continued her rudeness and her attitude, even though I was her boss. Literally one time I had to call her because she had made a mistake and we were going over it. She hung up on me. I called her right back and I said, you do not ever hang up on me. I'm taking a trip down to Atlanta next week and I'll see you then. So when I was down there, I made it just a one-day trip. She had an office there and I closed the door and I said, here's the deal. I know what you said about me and it must really kill you to have to work for someone who you called a queer, a fag. But guess what? I'm not going anywhere. So you either deal with it or you know where the door is, don't you? Fortunately, or unfortunately, the company collapsed and I never had to see or hear from her again. But the idea that she thought she could be that openly hateful and mean toward another person in front of the actual boss, she thought it was okay. She thought that what she was saying was fine. It just made me one more time realize that there are a lot of people that just fucking suck. This next story is one that I was told by one of my best friends. I don't know if I told you all, but let's call him Larry. I have mentioned Larry before in previous episodes, but I don't know if I told you that he was diagnosed with cancer and suddenly died. It was very quick. He didn't live 6 weeks after his diagnosis. But back in the day, he was the cat's meow of the city. He was the hot guy, the blonde-haired stud who drove a convertible that all the boys wanted to go home with. This is the same club that I was describing earlier. He was going there, well, let's just say quite a few years before I started going there. And he and his best friend would always go like on Friday nights and I think sometimes on Saturdays. One night, Larry was walking the same route that I took, until the incidents happened and they opened the section to let you walk straight into the club. He was walking that same path. This car pulled alongside him and they called for him or something. And he turned to look, and the person had a cup, a glass, something of either water or urine, and threw it right in his face. And they took off. What they didn't realize is that Larry's best friend was in the car behind theirs, coming down the same street looking for a parking spot. And he packed heat. He had a gun. He took off after them down the street, on the strip, going after them with the gun out the window, trying to shoot at them. And why I'm telling you that story is because, yes, we know that there are bullies and homophobes and monsters. But a lot of times there are gay people who are willing to fight back and get down and dirty too. Luckily for Larry, he didn't let that affect him in a bad way. Cleaned himself up and kept coming to the club, understanding that some people are assholes and they always will be. And you just go on with it. He's lucky, though, that it wasn't something like acid or harsh chemical or something that could have really hurt him. So, in a way, he was relieved that it was just either water or urine. I got the feeling that a lot of you may be thinking to yourselves, oh my God, those are terrible situations to be in. And yes, they are, but it would never prevent me from going to the club. There was never going to be anything like that was going to keep me away, because despite all those things, when you were inside those four walls, you were free. And I can't ever explain that sufficiently to really describe that feeling. When you truly feel free, what it does for you and your life and your self-esteem, even though sometimes you could have your ego kind of shattered by a potential one-night stand who rejects you, there was still an overwhelming sense of family and a bond that we all shared. And I can remember 2 particular summers in a row, there was like 50 or 60 of us in the community, and we loved to dance, and we would fill up the dance floor every Friday night and sometimes Saturday nights too. And it was just the ultimate feeling of joy of being part of this community that reminds you that you really aren't that different, that you aren't a freak, that you are just as good as anybody else. And while we may struggle these next 4 years, and it could be some really dark times, never forget that there is a community that you can bond with that will still be there despite anything and everything they try to bring us down. We'll still be around. We'll survive this. And knowing that we have that kind of strength in us does indeed give me hope for the future. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Alan After Dark. I hope you've been entertained or challenged, and I hope you feel maybe just a little bit more optimistic about our future. And if nothing else, know that you've got one person out there who's got your back. Remember, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.